if you were to rank Tesla relative to General Motors or Waymo or whomever, I would say they have some natural enormous advantages. But like someone pukes in your car, if you own the car, your kid gets sick at night, you take them to the ER. There's a lot of edge cases that are, you and I learned at Uber, the edge case is the case you have to deal with because the only thing people complain about is the edge case, right? And it's real. If people start relying on you as a service, there's a lot to work through, and people vastly underestimate the cost, expertise, time scale, regulatory approval, all the things required to make it work. It's good.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hi, I'm Emil Michael.
And I'm Chris Saad. On this week's show, we're going to give an update on Elon Musk, as we do most weeks, it seems, his conversation with Donald Trump on X, and his delayed RoboTaxi announcement. What does it really mean to run a taxi and rideshare service at scale? We discuss from our perspective and our experience from starting and running Uber. We also talk about BigCo M&A freezes, how Lena Khan is putting a chill in the air for big companies acquiring small startups and scale-ups, how this is affecting VC, and how some VCs are coming out against her and trying to get her fired. And then finally, we talk about the election and AI's impact on recent stories. Trump claiming that Kamala photos have fake crowds, Elon sharing fake videos on X, and so much more. We're going to talk about AI's impact on the selection cycle and how it might play out from here. All that and much, much more on this week's show. Stay tuned.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right, we're back and ready to go. But before we get started, we want to talk about the Startup Podcast Pact, which asks if you've listened to a few of our episodes and gotten value, we only ask one thing in return, which is to please rate us and review us in your favorite podcasting app, give us a shout out on your favorite social network, and subscribe to us on YouTube. It helps us grow the show, it helps the algorithm know that you like us, and it helps us help more founders like you. All right, on our first topic today, we wanted to give an Elon update. In particular, two big Elon stories this week. Number one, Elon had an interview with Trump. I'd love to get your take. And number two, there was a RoboTaxi announcement delay recently where he was all set, or at least had promised that he would come out and talk about Tesla robotaxis, and that's been delayed. Emil, you and I had something to do with taxis and robo-taxis back in the day, so that'll be an interesting conversation for us to have as well. So let's start with Elon and Trump. I actually haven't seen the interview yet. I'm intending to watch it. We're probably different perspectives on this, but for me, I want to watch it just to watch the train wreck. But what I did watch actually was him and the All In guys, which I thought was really interesting. And so it's interesting that he's meeting with these kind of tech billionaires, tech influencers. So give us a bit of a rundown of some of the key things you heard, Emil, and some of your takeaways from that event.
I mean, it was so fascinating in so many ways. There was a lot of buildup because Trump was returning to X, Twitter, the first time in years. And then, Elon was hosting it. So you got a double dose of Trump haters, Elon haters, old media hating on new media, a bunch of people saying, is this a campaign donation? It was a friend. And then the European Digital Services Act regulators sent Elon a letter saying, be careful what happens in this conversation because it may violate our hate speech laws. And everyone got dragged. It was just, and then, Elon was careful to call it a conversation on an interview. I guess maybe there's some legal term of art there. The EU regulator was kind of smacked down by the president of the EU for sending a letter that was sort of ridiculous from a free speech standpoint. Like Elon and a former president are having a conversation. All of a sudden, they're getting pre-warned about what might happen in the conversation. They've been overstepping, but now this was like a slap in the face because it was so easy to explain. Like, who does this? This is insane. This is not Venezuela. This was Europe. This was the EU. It was about 45 minutes late because Elon said there was a denial of service attack on X. And then I listened to it, and there's about 1.5 million people concurrently listening throughout the whole thing. And then page views are near 1 billion right now. So again, hard to say how many of the billion were for what portions. But for me, it was like a holy crap moment. The new media is creating this sort of platform, if you will, that's like, again, further going to eat into traditional media's dominance on interviews, conversations for political candidates, and so on. And then in terms of the content, and people will differ on this depending on which tribe you're part of, but people say, "Oh my gosh, it was a meandering talk," and then you're like, "Wow, he spent 70 minutes riffing, no teleprompter, no previously asked, no prior notice on questions, and it was freewheeling and so on." So when you compare that to the Kamala campaign, which hasn't done any interviews, no press conferences, nothing, zero. And you can see how that's going to become sort of a component of this old media debate, because the old media has been supporting her and not pushing her to do these interviews. But now they're like, well, now we don't have you doing interviews and we don't have him doing interviews. What's our purpose? So a lot of stuff that was interesting about it to me.
Well, I got a lot to say about all that. So the denial of service attack is an interesting excuse potentially for his service shitting the bed. Is it a denial of service attack or is it a surge of traffic? I don't know.
Maybe.
The new media versus old media thing, Emil, I don't know how much you know about my background pre-Uber, but I was obsessed with social media disrupting legacy media, this idea of peer-to-peer storytelling, this return to the campfire, unmediated by editorial control, let's say. I helped power real-time social engagement on Washington Post and CNN and Disney and Turner and all this sort of stuff. And a lot of that was powered through developer platforms, which is why I got roped in to do that at Uber. I'm a big believer in social media, new media, having a big disruptive impact on old media and old ways of thinking. Now, a lot of that disruption has been far, far more negative than I had ever hoped.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a bit of an overstatement to think of X or Elon somehow introducing this idea of breaking old media. Like Zuck used to do the Facebook town hall with the candidates a couple of cycles ago, and Twitter had hosted events earlier, and there were even town halls that were like massive productions, which were branded, Facebook and so on. New media has been eating old media's lunch for a long time. I think this is maybe the emergence of a new kind of media in the sense that it's new right-wing media, right? This is the first time that any of these major tech platforms have been right of center rather than left of center. And so I think that's a new phenomenon. But more to the point, I'm not sure who something like this appeals to. Like, if you're in Trump's base, you already believe in what he's saying and what he would say to Musk. And if you're in Musk's base, you already know that he likes Trump and you probably already align with Trump. Isn't the point now to be broadening the tent and trying to bring in the undecideds and the moderates? Strategically, it just feels like a strange step to be taking now in the face of a Kamala and whatever Walz clearly re-energizing the Democratic side, the left side, and cannibalizing the middle. It feels weird for Trump to be retreating to the base or to the billionaire class. I don't know. It seems a bit strange to me.
Yeah, the billionaires on X, right? I mean, come on, man.
No, I'm saying like to the people who buy this narrative, whether you buy it or not. Like, is Musk and Trump broadening the story for him to get more undecideds back over the fence?
I mean, here's my view, which is on X, it may be that it has become a place that, since Musk bought it, that there's more of a narrative that the right can tell where they felt like couldn't tell it except on Fox News. But that doesn't mean the user base. I mean, they're like, if anything, I think Linda Yaccarino, the CEO of X, released some stat that there's more Democrats on the platform than Republicans. I don't know how they tell that, but I don't think it's as non-diverse as you think politically. So if you're Trump,
sorry to interrupt. I don't mean Twitter is filled with only right. I mean, Musk now as a brand seems to be popular with the right and
Yeah.
a similar kind of right that Trump is. And so those two together, whether it's streamed on Twitter or streamed on wherever, what is the point of having conversation with Elon Musk when you're trying to get the middle is what I'm a bit confused about.
If you think about what the audience for that was, people who like Musk, who might be Democrats, remember, like he has a green, he's Mr. Green in terms of his electrification of autos, right? People who are, what do you call it, degrowthers versus growthers, people who are growthers, but maybe left of center in terms of cultural politics. And frankly, again, if you're now in the US, if you watch US network news, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox, overwhelmingly it's left. So when you add the six together. So the fact that Trump got a hour and a half means a lot to just like reaching people. It's not a narrow cast. Like if you told me he went on the Christian Broadcasting Network, I'd say, okay, well, he might have that constituency pretty locked up and you might not want to spend a half a day doing that in what's left of 80-day campaign. But when you hit this broad swath, I think it can't hurt. Unless you don't do well,
Unless you don't do well. Well, that actually brings me to the other point you raised I'd love to talk about, which is when you said what topics were discussed, you kind of actually quickly pivoted to, well, at least it's live and everything Kamala does is scripted or pre-recorded, I guess. But what was it that he said? Again, I haven't seen it, but a lot of what he says, as far as I've seen so far, is based on faulty assumptions, on weird. And I'm not saying weird because that's the Kamala line. Actually, just my own thought is like, it's either a bad assumption, a massive over-exaggeration, or an incorrect prescription, or it is right assumption, right prescription coming from the mouth of an authoritarian who seems like a self-serving grifter. So like, I can't, what's the content of this 1.5 hour conversation?
You've got to remember, there's 1,000 things to talk about. The border, inflation, Ukraine, Israel, and it hit all those topics.
And did he have anything that you would describe as, like at Uber, we used to talk about horsepower, right? And we used to talk about truth seeking, and we used to talk about, fast forwarding to the future. And actually, many of the things Trump brings up, as I would describe them, as real problems that liberals and Democrats would like to stick their head in the sand about. But do you see horsepower and truth seeking and fast forwarding to a future in Trump versus exaggeration, misrepresentation, and wanting to go back to the past?
Man, you have full-throatedly like consumed the talking points. Like, holy cow!
That's not bad. No,
I mean,
no one.
Okay,
no one
hold on. No. Hold on. Going back to the past of lower inflation, I think most people would say that, like, yes, let's go back to the past on that issue. Going back to the past of fewer people coming over the border, people go like, yes, let's go back to the past on that. Sounds good.
Yes, but that's a good example, right? To go back to fewer people coming over the border. Let's assume for a moment there are too many people coming over the border, which I heard recently that there is actually less than during Trump, but whatever. Let's assume there are too many immigrants. Let's assume they're misusing the asylum laws. Just take that as assumed, even though maybe right or wrong, people will argue with us. But is building a physical wall a representation of a real solution from the future, or is it some reductive slogan from, bygone era?
I mean, there's a lot less talking about the wall, if at all, right now. It's all about the policies, catch and release, remain in Mexico, the speed at which you return people who don't have a valid assignment claim, what you assume to be a valid assignment claim. It's a lot of things. I don't think anyone will pretend that a single wall is all you need to do.
Well, except Trump in last cycle.
No. I mean, he talks about remain in Mexico. He talks about catch and release. He talks about...
What does remain in Mexico, by the way? I'm curious about that.
Remain in Mexico means if you're coming from a country that's not Mexico to try to cross the U.S. border and you want to apply for asylum, you have to remain in Mexico while you apply for asylum. So what it does is it doesn't sort of overwhelm us and then risk that whatever law enforcement agency can't handle you and they just release you into the system. And then it also forces some sample selection bias. So you're only going to go there and wait if you have an asylum claim that you think is valid and provable. So it had all these effects. I mean, when you talk about the border now and Biden being less bad than it was at the peak, yes, because he undid some of the damage he did when he took over the Trump's policies on day one. He issued 96 executive orders undoing some of this stuff. That being said,
I really, this particular topic is
hold
frustrating
on.
to me because Trump undid the bipartisan agreement to fix the border, right?
But no. You can't 3.5 years in.
Why not?
3.5 years in going like, wow, 15 million people came in. We should pass this border thing. And it doesn't pass because it allows 3,000 people a day, 1 million people a day to still come in. It allows a bunch of things. It allows amnesty and things. And say, the guy didn't approve it 3.5 years in. What about the 10 million people who came in the first 3.5 years? Are you not responsible for that?
That's called sunk cost. That's called compromise. It's called politics is the art of getting stuff done, right? Like it was a bipartisan bill that was about to be signed that he said, hey, this is bad for me politically. Please don't sign it.
Look, but bipartisan when it's 51 Democrats and 2 Republicans, none from a border state. None. Look,
is that the actual ratio? Is that the actual ratio?
Yes, look at the vote. You Google it. It was
hang on. That's the vote. That's the vote. I'm talking about the authoring and what the vote was set up to be.
There's one guy.
Trump cratered the vote. That's the point I'm making.
Look, I read that. I'm a lawyer geek. I read the bill. It was a terrible bill. Is it better than all the previous bills I failed? Yes. Was it in and of itself a bad bill? Yes.
Then we're enthusiastically agreed.
but back to what Elon said, he actually raised this issue, which is one of the new things I heard about immigration from Trump yesterday, which was he said, "Are you for legal immigration?" Legal immigration, and he said, "Yes. If they're vetted and they meet the criteria that we have, I am for. I am not against legal immigration." And
as long as they're not Muslim, though. As long as they're not Muslim.
No. Elon said, I'm an immigrant. He's like, remember the ban on certain religious groups coming was in retrospect to stop the sort of Syrian immigration that happened during that term that's now causing problems in Europe.
My favorite thing about Trump supporters, and I love that we're having this conversation, Emil. Thank you for having it with me. They're far more rational, nuanced, clever, and articulate than Trump will ever be. And reasonable, and it's that classic thing of liberals seem to take him literally but not seriously, and people who support him seem to be taking him seriously but not literally. If what he believes is what you're describing in some cases, then I would have less of a problem with him, putting aside his tendency to call the media the enemy of the people. And
that's very word sell of you, Chris.
What's word selling?
I can resend word selling versus shape rotators. People who do stuff versus word sell who mince on words. The thing is in politics, and the reason why Bill Clinton was so good at politics, or Obama was, or even George W. Bush at politics, was because they were able to encapsulate something that more people could consume than the nuanced conversation that happens behind the scenes or in other forums. And that is a political skill to be able to do that.
It's a leadership skill, right?
It's a leadership skill too, but Trump does it in a way where if the policy he implements you'd agree with, you're so angry about the way he says it that not you.
Oh, I see.
The left is so angry about how he says these things, not about how he does them, because they have to go through a policy process. They have to be implemented. So of course there's nuance. There's no build a wall and it's done,
I have a lot more to say about this, but this is not the politics show. It's a startup show. So let's move on to the other Elon news of the week, which is the RoboTaxi announcement. Look, there's Waymo out here, which I'm using on the regular. There's Tesla that's been threatening to launch a RoboTaxi service for ages. I know one of our mutual friends, maybe I won't name him, was selling his company, was interviewed by Elon to come join him for the RoboTaxi business, was ultimately ended up joining Uber. And I'll take a small amount of credit for that. I helped Travis recruit him. And he would have been a key hire for Elon. There was rumors that Travis was in talks to go join, if you don't know, former founder and former CEO of Uber. What strikes me about Waymo and about Tesla and about the whole RoboTaxi conversation is that I find people underestimate the level of competence and effective operational execution it takes to do on-demand rides. And I had a crash course in effective execution at Uber of the likes that I don't think anybody can truly comprehend except for those who were there in the early days. And what it meant to be competent and high quality and execute well at scale. And that ops team was breathtaking. in what they could achieve. And I'm just not sure that a Google or a Tesla are ready for that kind of real-time operational excellence at the edge, not in a warehouse. And it feels like that's being underestimated. Does that matter for Tesla since they're private cars and they're maybe maintained by their owners, or is there enough supply there to meet the demand?
I'm with you on this. The people overestimate any company's ability to do all the things required to make a at-scale driverless car service, including Tesla. If you were to rank Tesla relative to General Motors or Waymo or whomever, I would say they have some natural enormous advantages. But like, someone pukes in your car if you own the car, or your kid gets sick at night, you take them to ER. There's a lot of edge cases that you and I learned at Uber. The edge case is the case you have to deal with, because like the only thing people complain about is the edge case, right? And it's real. If people start relying on you as a service, as important as transportation, which is maybe below electricity and water, but high up on your basic needs list, if you rely on something, whether it's public transport or your car or a ride-sharing service, there's a lot to work through, and people vastly underestimate the cost, expertise, time scale, regulatory approval, all the things required to make it work at scale.
I tend to agree. And I think that's probably what characterizes Elon in general, which is he seems to have really bold, incredible ideas, but vastly underestimates the time scale and the requirements to get them done. But because he has the capital, the brand, the momentum, the team, the what have you, it might take 2, 3, 5, 10 years more than he thought, but he'll just brute force his way and get it done, which is to be admired. But I do think as analysts, as consumers, as pundits, you don't want to underestimate what it's going to take for Tesla RoboTaxi to work. It's going to take years and years of investment. I remember just talking about the edge case is the case. That's such a great way of saying it, Emil. I'll use a very extreme example, and it was maybe early in my time at Uber, maybe midway through my time. I remember that there was a problem where we had 1 or 2 rapes in the cars by drivers, maybe in India. And I remember thinking to myself, well, if something happens 1 million times a day, then 1 in a million event is going to happen. Like, I don't know why we're being blamed for rape. Like, that was my initial reaction. And it was a bit matter of fact about it. Like, I'm not sure why that mattered, like why that's Uber's fault. But I remember Travis coming out and saying something which, again, recalibrated my brain in terms of maximum accountability and leadership, is like, Uber needs to be the safest bubble in the city. And we are going to do everything to make it safer than the street outside. And I just remember thinking, fuck, that's an ambitious goal. And that is so the right way to think about this. And shit, I was not thinking bold enough about this. It just struck me as so compelling. But it does talk to how the edge cases, even the ones that ostensibly you can't control how 2 humans interact with each other, they are the cases. And Uber has so many subtle and obvious techniques and tactics and technologies and processes to deal with this. I'm both reminded and reminiscing with you about how breathtaking and fun Uber was, and also trying to help people understand that, hey, a RoboTaxi is hard to do. And I look forward to Elon having a try. It'd be awesome to see.
I remember those situations and feeling somewhat helpless and sad about it, and remember Travis's sort of gumption on that and how important it was to see it in that way. And I also feel like initially Uber is solving a really narrow problem. It's like, well, black car services that are not time sharing are more expensive. And then it was like the airport rides and reliability. And then when we got to X, you got into these very human use cases. Even though I still believe at all times we were the safest for hire ride on the road, more than taxis. Yes. Because we had a credit card at the drivers. We had we had so many from day one advantages. Every time an incident happened, we had to be thinking, what could we do better? And I think your brand, when you start to become a big consumer brand, is very, very brittle when it comes to these edge cases. And people are more likely to understand if they feel you're doing literally everything you can for those edge cases. And if they don't, like you don't care, or hey, it's statistically whatever, I think they won't be forgiving, and they probably shouldn't be.
I guess that's where I come from. If longtime listeners of the show have heard me rant about how I think Mark Zuckerberg is unfairly tarnished with some of the things that happen on Facebook. And I think that's where I'm coming from, is this idea of the statistical significance and just the reality of running things at scale is lost on so many people, and the lack of empathy for some of those leaders. Now, yeah, sure, they got $1 billion and billions of dollars, and they should be held accountable, all this sort of stuff. But I do think it's a hard problem, and it's admirable to see people solve it.
Well, the thing I continue to get amusement out of is people are like, I'm never flying Delta or American again. You're like, oh, because the rainstorm hit whatever, or the engine needed more oil. And that's a great example of like, it's such a complex product with so many failure points that are, no matter what American Airlines does, it's just going to fail. That is statistically,
Yes.
a hurricane's coming. What are you going to do?
If you ask those same people how many times they failed in their job and how low stakes that failure was.
Well, but okay, the Boeing thing aside, which is like a design failure, that still sounds like that. Because when American Airlines canceled their flights and your family has to sadly sit in the airport all day, what is the CEO supposed to do about that impending hurricane that caused that, right?
Right.
And the reason we're unforgiving about it is because, like, yes, like I had my vacation moment. I was going to my grandmother's funeral, and whatever happened, the stories are like very empathetic. But the reality is, like, what are they supposed to do about 90% of those things?
All right. Let's move on to our second topic, which is the BigCo M&A Freeze. There's a lot of antitrust allegations in the air. Google just got slapped with an antitrust judgment against their search and ads business. It is clear that this FTC, run by Lina Khan and the Biden administration, does not want to see large companies exercising their distribution advantage, acquiring companies, solidifying their positions. Now, on the last episode, we talked about this having pros and cons, right? On the upside, if they're unable to compete in certain categories, this creates more space for startups to innovate. But if they're unable to acquire startups, this creates a problem in the Silicon Valley innovation pipeline, because many of these VCs are investing with a hope of their companies getting acquired at many X multiples by the big tech companies. And so what we're seeing, Emil, now is these weird acqui-hire, pseudo acquisitions, right? We saw this with a recent company by Microsoft. They acquired Inflection, and they just kind of stripped it of its people. And now Google has acquired, has stripped characters.ai of their founders and are now sort of taking its guts without ever acquiring it. This is bad for VC, right? Because they're not getting their multiples. They're not getting the entity acquired. And so it's unsurprising, actually, that VCs have come out recently against Lina Khan and the FTC and are really upset about this. Emil, you want to tell us more about this? Which VC specifically? What do you think their motivations are? And how does this all connect together?
The reason this sort of became a hot issue in the last week or two is because Reid Hoffman was one of the biggest Democratic donors in tech.
Reid Hoffman, by the way, founder of LinkedIn, the main partner at the top VC firm in the world, the lead guy at Greylock. He is associated with Blitzscaling AI Fund, which my friend Jeremiah runs. He's a friend of the pod. He's been on the show a number of times. And so, Reid Hoffman, big deal in Silicon Valley.
And apparently, as the switch between Biden and Kamala was happening, one of the suggestions that was made by him on behalf of the tech community was that Lina Khan, whose term ends in September, not be renewed because of the way the terms work in the FTC. And he was questioned about that in the media, and he tried to say, like, well, I have my donor hat and then I have my expert hat. My expert hat says she's bad for the business. And I think he was reflecting the concerns of a lot of VCs, right, left, center, which is that they don't quite understand the importance of acquisitions to startups. If you take that away with the theory that bigger is bad, which was with Lina Khan's theory, it's just like big is bad, period. Therefore, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta trying to acquire a $40 million metaverse company is just bad, even though it's like means nothing in terms of sort of market consolidation or dominance. It's bad, and we're going to try to block it. That was his logic, and I think a lot of VCs agree with that. I would agree with that because I think you should judge each acquisition on its merits in terms of control of the market, but you can't have a blanket rule that just says big is bad, because big is not always bad. And what if Amazon developed AWS in-house, which they did? You can't prevent that from an antitrust standpoint. And then Microsoft's like, well, we have to catch up. We want to acquire something. And you're going to say no. So then you have this literally creating one dominant player and not allowing the other big players to drive price down and service up. So there's just a fundamental misunderstanding of basic Adam Smith economics at the FTC, in my view.
Actually, I find, and I've mentioned and alluded to this in previous episodes, I find the US generally has a really bad understanding about ecosystems and systems and second and third order effects. You know, you and I were having a friendly debate the other episode about UBI and whether it's the silver bullet to some of these ills. And I'm saying, no, it's going to be a system. It's going to be an ecosystem of tools, and it needs to be thought of as a cohesive thing. And I think the same thing here is like this, like, as you're saying, it's this very blunt instrument of big is bad, or, you know, big tech is bad. And on the other hand, you know, more permissive environment where it's like, yeah, go acquire anything, go do anything. And no, it's more like tending a garden, right? It's more like curating an ecosystem. And again, not to lean on my background too much, but, you know, I'm an ecosystem guy. You know, you and I were part of a marketplace, which is it was a kind of an ecosystem, right? And so these things require careful calibration, careful tending, careful refinement of incentives and disincentives, carrots and sticks, and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of unintended consequences about putting a chill in the air about big tech companies buying smaller companies and making moves. And I think your prescription is the right one, Emil, which is each case has to be taken on the merits. And even then, it needs to be taken on its merits by sophisticated people who can understand some of the subtleties that are going on, casting very precise judgments that talk about precisely what was bad, not just big bad.
There's two pieces of the big bad theory and then the bureaucratic ability to just slow something down. And when we say slow something down in terms of government approvals, we're talking about years. So you have this chilling effect where, like, even if we won on the merits, we're going to have to spend 2 years. I'm Figma, going to get acquired for $13 billion, or I'm the fintech company that was going to get acquired by Visa. You stay in purgatory for a year and a half. All your startup people don't know what to do. It kind of have some clear, timely rules of the road and some sophistication on those things. And that's, if anything the government should be able to do, it would be that, because we're not asking them to build a road. Other people could build roads. But this is the only thing the government can do alone, is evaluate these things. Who else can do it?
I think this is one of the fundamental tensions in me personally, is this tension between being a deep believer in innovation, private innovation through startups specifically, and also being a deep believer in government as the thing we all choose to do together. It's kind of the operating system, the foundational primitives of society. And what's missing, I think, is a more thoughtful discussion about what belongs at the platform layer, government, and what belongs at the application layer, you know, private companies and citizens. Where do we want to allow the platform to cannibalize the private layer, and why? And when do we want the application layer to be innovative and disruptive? I don't think any country I'm aware of gets this right. Australia's and Europe is too, quote unquote, socialist or populist or egalitarian, where the platform layer, government, has cannibalized too much of the application layer. And I think the US is, in some parts, in some ways, the platform layer is completely abdicated its responsibility. It's ineffective, inefficient, and the people trying to get into power in the platform layer don't even like the platform layer. They want to make it smaller and dumber. And so there's a more nuanced conversation here, guys. And I'd love to, we should start the politics podcast. It's just we should just have more fun about this.
My starting principle is there is very little the government can and should do better than private entities. But there are things it can and should and needs to do better than private entities. Military, fighting wars. We don't want private companies fighting a war because their interests are not aligned with the country's interests.
And yet the US has a lot of private companies fighting war, right?
They're private contractors, but writ large, right? I'm just giving an example where right, left, center should be able to agree that there has to be a monopoly on force, against foreign powers. And there are these antitrust laws. The Justice Department can't be outsourcing to private courts, criminalization of citizens. It's like, that's why you have, if you had a government for anything, it would be those things. Does the government have to be an expert in building rockets? Not anymore. I don't think. They did back in the day, but they don't anymore. So I'm fine letting that one go.
But what I'm trying to talk about though is how do we generalize these principles as platform principles, as marketplace principles, as ecosystem principles, so that it doesn't require Emil and Chris on a podcast to go, I'm okay with that one, but I'm not okay with that one.
My principle on it, which again is admittedly like general, but it's what are the functions that the government should be the only party that does it, because that's the country we chose and no one else can do it better given our principles. If the principle is that you have a Fourth Amendment right to be free of specious prosecutions, then we don't, like, who is the other party that could administer justice other than the government?
I think it's easier to agree on what is the minimum set of things. I think it's harder to agree on the ideal set of things, because I don't think the benchmark is...
I'm at minimum. My philosophy is minimum.
No, I understand. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people in the US, at least probably 40, 50% of people who would agree with you.
Yeah.
And there is this tension at the heart of the US of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps and the we are a community, tribes. And it's like that tension is at the heart of everything in the US almost. And I think there's a more sophisticated conversation to be had than that. I don't think when you really test the minimalists, they actually are minimalist. And I don't think when you test the people accused of being maximalist, that they really want the maximal outcome. And it's the famous horseshoe, right? At the edges, you end up back at tyranny. There's left-wing tyranny and right-wing tyranny. And so I would love to discuss where the center of the horseshoe is. And I think the answer is actually, there is no perfect answer, that each country optimizes for the lifestyle and principles that it has. And for my money, I think the US is too far right, and I think Australia is too far left. That's for my personal taste. I've traveled a lot, and I haven't found a country that I think isn't somewhere in the right place.
The US is, from a GDP you pick your metric and compare it to other large, diverse countries.
Well,
there's no better system.
Don't say pick your metric, right? Because, there's that beautiful
Brazil,
Aaron
Russia,
Sorkin...
China, India.
No.
Those are the biggest countries in the world. That's like 70% of the world's population right there.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you said GDP, et cetera, pick your metric. You're right. What you measure is what you move. And GDP is a measure. But if you look at, child mortality or like happiness or violence or what have you, the US, is not the top of very much. There was this beautiful...
But your sample set, my sample set is large, diverse countries. China,
Sure.
India, Brazil, Russia, US, Indonesia, I guess. Like if you want to add like the population lowest, those countries are 70, 80% of the world's population. Like, yes, those are one or two metrics, but overall, where are people immigrating to in any of those countries?
There's a lot of people moving to Portugal, apparently.
No, I know, but not small. But that's because it's small and narrow cast and it has a philosophy that maybe you agree with. Maybe your lifestyle agrees with it. They say, I'm trying to limit to large diverse because large diverse necessarily has systemic failures and successes, and you have to choose like what balance you want.
Yeah. Right? No, I think I really agree with you that you have to look at the set of large and diverse. That's a really important qualifying criteria. Again, another conversation I'd love to go really, really deep on another time.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right. Let's talk about our third and final topic today. This has been another politics episode, a heavy politics episode, but it is connected to tech. I think that's very clear. Trump is, clearly put out. I'm sure you'll characterize this differently than I will, Emil, but I actually think it's fair to say Trump is quite upset and spinning his wheels and kind of emotional about the bait and switch with Biden and Kamala. He's trying to figure out a line of attack and he is not succeeding. I think it's fair to say that. I think their momentum has radically shifted. I mean, like whiplash shifted from holy shit, that was badass that he got shot at, stood up and pumped his fist into the air. Like even I was like, fuck, that's cool, to holy shit, Kamala is new and fresh and exciting and blah, blah, blah. He's pissed. The polls are shifting. They're still within the margin of error, but the plus is in Kamala's camp now. And now, we're back to arguing about crowd sizes, which is, I feel like he keeps reverting to when he's upset. So he's now saying, hey, Kamala's crowd is AI generated and that's fake. Fake news. Anything that Trump doesn't like is fake news and alternative facts. Again, I know, Emil, you'd characterize this dramatically differently. So how about you set it up from your point of view and tell me what you think about this whole story of Trump claiming AI fake images. And we're seeing little glimmers of, AI casting doubt on some of the stories and reality and facts of this campaign.
We've just seen the beginning of the AI invasion into politics. I mean, this whole JD Vance couch thing was based on an AI generated fake pictures of his book. And it got like weeks of momentum and it led to the weird thing. That was the sort of original sort of instance in the last month or so about like a viral. Yeah, I think some people want to talk about crowd size. That has not been nearly as sort of globally distributed as literally a fake picture of 2 pages in his book that didn't exist, that caused this couch thing and this weird thing. And I think ultimately every party's going to have to deal with this. This is going to be a problem. And I guess maybe just the fact checking generally is good, and everyone may not love it now, but they're going to love it later because, like, how else do you kind of suss this out? And things move so fast. Like, someone puts a picture of a book or a picture of a crowd and it gets lightning sort of distribution, and then later someone says it's fake, right? And if you don't go lightning fast, you don't have the rapid response team, which was invented in the 90s, but now is kind of taken on unbelievable amount more speed and distribution. I think that the last couple of weeks, there's so many things that have happened that are like once in our lifetime. It's sort of hard to be like, oh, we should have done this or someone should have done that or whatever. But I think I said right after Biden stepped down and Kamala took over that her momentum is going to last through the convention. So you're talking about late July through end of August. That's a long time in a short political campaign. And we're still not at the convention. That's like next week. And after Labor Day is when you'll see, okay, a little more balance in like what's really going to happen in November. Right now, the polls mean nothing. And I think the polls did mean something when it was Trump-Biden, but that scrambled the race when it's Trump-Kamala. And that's why Biden got out, because the polls were saying like this is a sustainable advantage the other side has. But no one on Trump's side is saying like, oh, it's over, we lost. It's over, because they know the polls have this like momentum bounce to it that's propagated by a very supplicant media right now. But that'll change.
So here's the fascinating thing. While you were talking, I was asking ChatGPT, what is the part of JD Vance's book that actually mentions this couch thing? And it cited a paragraph. And I'm like, can you double check this and make sure it's not a hallucination? And it's like, oh, I double checked it. And I'm sorry, I must clarify, there is no passage that mentions intimacy with a couch. So I don't know if this fucking passage is real or not. I can't speak to whether it's real or not. It's bizarre.
Do use Snopes. That's my new left-wing fact checker. Where even if they say this is fake, you're like, you can be sure it's fake.
Let me see. Fact checks trending. Did JD Vance mention intimacy with a couch in his book? No. First edition of JD Vance's Hillbilly Eulogy doesn't mention couch cushion eroticism. Hang on, let's see. We have the first edition. The passage of him shellacking a couch isn't in it. It doesn't mean that it never was. It could have been a test run and deleted in the initial paperback. Who knows? Even Snopes is hedging. Anyway, the most interesting thing I've heard about AI and society, and I've mentioned this on the show before, was Christian, who did The Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix, saying, we've already made first contact with AI, and it was in the form of the Facebook algorithm, and it didn't end well. And I thought that was a really compelling way of framing the AI question and its impact on politics and civilization. And there's that classic cliche saying of a lie can make its way halfway around the world before the truth even has a chance to put its pants on. That's a very old quote, and it's not halfway around the world, it's 10 times around the world before the truth even sees the light of day. And yet, on the other hand, nothing we see is real. Every photo is AI enhanced, especially if it comes out of your smartphone. It's baked into the pipeline. I was just seeing a MKBHD video of a new Google feature where you can take a photo of a group of people and then get someone else to come around behind the camera, hold the camera, and then you can go stand and it shows you where the other people were, and you can line up and you can take the second photo, and now it looks like all of you were in the photo together. it's just going to get worse. And yeah, we've talked about this endlessly, I think, and I don't know if there's much more to say about it. Go back into the back catalog and hear our thoughts on it. But I do think it's interesting, though, that there's two new pieces of information that's happened since we've talked about it, or two new examples. There's Trump using AI as an excuse to declare something fake. And there's Elon, who has warned about the dangers of AI, sharing also something else it was clearly a parody in my mind, but it was AI generated and people were calling him out for misinformation and contributing to the information.
But what about the couch? Don't forget the couch.
The couch, I guess, is the third thing as well. No, you're right. But these are kind of echo chamber things where everyone thought it was true versus I think Trump knows it's a lie. I think Elon knew that was a parody, knew that it was a lie. I don't think he was sharing it as fact, but he still shared it.
Parodies are not lies. They're parodies, Chris. The question is like, if it was labeled as a parody, we're allowed to have some fun. You're allowed to go to a comedy show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think that that Elon's thing is bad in and of itself. I think that there's a confluence there of he's warned about the dangers of AI. He is such a loud megaphone voice, and everything he says, if I were him, I would put more thought into it. Because
the guy literally said on my platform, if you are doing a parody, you have to say it's a parody. So people write that
he didn't say it was a parody. He didn't say it was a parody. He just tweeted it.
The link said it was a parody.
Oh, come on.
But yeah, okay, it could be a label better, sure. But you don't know about the Trump thing. Like that story was going around for hours about the AI thing. And it wasn't confirmed till later that, yes, that was not. So you're mad that, or people are mad that he didn't retract it after it was discovered to be AI.
That it was discovered to be not AI.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't believe Trump ever thought it was AI. I think he says a lot of shit that he doesn't believe.
Yeah, you're not a right-wing Twitter enough.
Let's call it here. Emil, it's been so much fun. This is more fun when it's just the two of us. We just get to rant and rave and banter and debate with each other. But without the calm mediating voice of Yaniv to help us find the middle. It's so much fun, my friend. Emil, how can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Emil Michael.
Awesome. And you can find me over on all the social media at Chris Saad or at chrissaad.com and chrissaad.com/newsletter, where you can subscribe to me directly, not mediated by AI. All right, guys. It was great to have you listening. And thanks, Emil, for joining me.
See you, buddy.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.